The confrontation took place during the inaugural International Music Festival in Cannes on May 15, 1973, an ambitious event designed to showcase diverse musical traditions from around the world to European audiences and music industry professionals. The festival was being held in conjunction with the famous Cannes Film Festival, taking advantage of the international media presence and cultural elite gathering to launch what organizers hoped would become an annual celebration of global musical artistry. Bob Marley was there representing Caribbean music as part of Island Records' expanding international campaign, while Jimi Hendrix had been invited as the festival's headline act and was widely regarded as the most innovative and influential guitarist of his generation. The contrast between the two musicians was striking, with Hendrix representing the pinnacle of American rock guitar virtuosity and Bob embodying the emerging spiritual and musical consciousness of the Caribbean reggae movement. The festival had been proceeding smoothly for 3 days, with performances by artists from Africa, South America, Asia, and Europe drawing enthusiastic responses from the sophisticated Cannes audience. Bob had performed earlier in the week to polite but somewhat reserved applause, as reggae music was still largely unknown to European audiences and was viewed by many as an interesting but primitive musical curiosity rather than a serious artistic form. Jimi Hendrix was scheduled to close the festival with what was expected to be a spectacular performance that would demonstrate why he was considered the most important guitarist in contemporary popular music. However, during a press conference held the day before his performance, Hendrix was asked by a French journalist about his thoughts on the diversity of musical styles being presented at the festival. Hendrix's response revealed cultural attitudes and musical prejudices that would prove to be catastrophically misjudged and culturally insensitive. "I've heard some interesting things this week," he said, his voice carrying the casual arrogance and cultural superiority that had become characteristic of rock stars discussing other musical forms, particularly those from non-Western traditions. "But some of what's being called music here is really just primitive island pretending. That reggae stuff, especially, shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what real music is supposed to accomplish artistically and technically." The journalist, intrigued by Hendrix's dismissive and controversial comments, pressed him for more specific observations about Caribbean music and Bob Marley's performance in particular. Hendrix, apparently unaware that his comments would be widely reported and reach Bob's ears within hours, continued his culturally ignorant attack on reggae and Caribbean musical culture with increasing arrogance and disrespect. "Bob Marley seems like a nice enough guy, but he's a primitive island pretender who doesn't understand real music or artistic sophistication," Hendrix said, with the kind of casual cultural superiority and musical elitism that was common among American and British rock musicians when discussing non-Western musical traditions. "What he's doing isn't sophisticated or challenging from a technical standpoint. It's just simple rhythms and basic chord progressions that anyone with minimal musical training could play. Real music requires technical skill, innovation, and artistic vision that goes beyond just banging on drums and strumming 3 chords like some kind of musical primitive." The comments were published in the International Herald Tribune, Le Figaro, and several French music publications the following morning, creating an immediate sensation at the festival and throughout the international music community. Bob Marley, who was preparing to leave Cannes after completing his scheduled performance, was shown the newspaper articles by members of his entourage, who were outraged by Hendrix's dismissive and culturally ignorant remarks about Caribbean musical traditions. Instead of responding with anger or engaging in a public war of words through media statements, Bob quietly approached the festival organizers and requested permission to respond to Hendrix's culturally ignorant comments through music rather than through interviews or press conferences. The festival directors, recognizing the potential for a historically significant musical moment and understanding the cultural importance of the confrontation, arranged for both artists to appear together on the festival's final evening, with Bob given an unprecedented opportunity to perform immediately before Hendrix's closing set. The arrangement created enormous anticipation and international media attention among the festival audience, music industry professionals, and international press, who understood that they were about to witness either a spectacular vindication of Hendrix's assessment of Caribbean music or a dramatic demonstration of reggae's artistic legitimacy and musical sophistication that could change global perceptions of non-Western musical traditions. When Bob walked onto the Cannes Festival stage that evening, carrying only his acoustic guitar and accompanied by a single backing vocalist, the contrast with Hendrix's elaborate electric setup and full band was immediately apparent and seemed to confirm the cultural divide between sophisticated Western music and simple island traditions. The simplicity of Bob's presentation seemed to confirm Hendrix's criticism about the primitive nature of Caribbean music, and many in the European audience expected a brief, polite performance that would pale in comparison to the rock virtuosity and technical sophistication they were about to experience from America's guitar genius. Instead, what Bob delivered was one of the most transcendent and musically sophisticated performances in the history of international music festivals. He began with an extended instrumental introduction that immediately revealed layers of harmonic complexity and rhythmic innovation that most of the audience had never heard in reggae music, demonstrating a level of musical intelligence that challenged every assumption about Caribbean musical capabilities. Bob's guitar work demonstrated a level of technical skill and musical sophistication that went far beyond anything Hendrix had imagined possible within the reggae format. His playing incorporated elements of classical music composition, advanced jazz harmonies, traditional African polyrhythms, and Caribbean folk traditions in ways that created something entirely new and revolutionary, while remaining authentically rooted in Jamaican musical culture and spiritual consciousness. The technical virtuosity was extraordinary, but it was only part of what made Bob's performance so devastating to Hendrix's reputation and credibility as a musical authority. The spiritual power and emotional depth of Bob's music created a connection with the Cannes audience that transcended mere entertainment and entered the realm of transformative artistic experience that touched souls and changed hearts. Bob performed extended versions of No Woman, No Cry and Get Up, Stand Up, but his arrangements revealed these songs to be far more musically complex and emotionally sophisticated than anyone in the European audience had previously understood or appreciated. His guitar solos were not displays of technical showmanship designed to impress other musicians, but spiritual journeys that seemed to connect the sophisticated Cannes audience with something universal, profound, and deeply meaningful. The performance lasted 45 minutes, during which time the entire festival audience sat in reverent, amazed silence, recognizing that they were witnessing something historically significant and artistically transformative. European music critics, who had come to Cannes expecting to see primitive island music, found themselves experiencing a level of artistic sophistication that challenged their fundamental assumptions about musical hierarchy and cultural value.
The audience included some of the most sophisticated and culturally aware people in Europe: film directors, classical musicians, jazz virtuosos, and cultural critics who had initially dismissed reggae as simple island music. As Bob's performance continued, these cultural authorities found their preconceptions completely shattered by the depth and complexity of what they were experiencing. Bob's guitar technique alone was revelatory, demonstrating finger-picking patterns that incorporated classical Spanish guitar methods, jazz chord voicings that rivaled the most accomplished bebop musicians, and rhythmic innovations that created polyrhythmic layers of extraordinary sophistication. His vocal delivery moved seamlessly between intimate storytelling and transcendent spiritual expression, creating an emotional range that few performers could match. When Bob finally finished and quietly left the stage with characteristic humility and grace, the applause was sustained and deeply respectful in a way that suggested the audience understood they had experienced true artistic greatness that transcended national boundaries and cultural categories. The standing ovation lasted over 12 minutes, with many audience members visibly moved to tears by the spiritual power and musical beauty of what they had witnessed. Jimi Hendrix, who had been scheduled to follow Bob's performance with his own closing set as the festival's marquee attraction, found himself in an impossible and professionally devastating position. The audience's response to Bob's musical demonstration had completely shifted the evening's energy and expectations, and Hendrix's planned electric rock showcase suddenly seemed crude, superficial, and spiritually empty in comparison to the profound depth and musical sophistication they had just experienced. When Hendrix took the stage with his full electric band, elaborate Marshall amplifier stacks, and signature Fender Stratocaster, his performance was technically excellent and professionally executed, but emotionally hollow and spiritually vacant compared to what Bob had just delivered through simple acoustic guitar and authentic cultural expression. The contrast between Bob's genuine spiritual expression and Hendrix's theatrical rock showmanship was so stark and devastating that it made Hendrix's music seem mechanical, soulless, and artistically inferior rather than innovative and groundbreaking. The festival audience, having just experienced Bob's transcendent musical spirituality and cultural authenticity, responded to Hendrix's performance with polite but distinctly unenthusiastic applause. The electric energy that Hendrix typically generated through his virtuosic guitar techniques and elaborate stage theatrics fell completely flat, and his technically impressive guitar solos seemed like empty exercises in showmanship rather than meaningful artistic statements with genuine emotional content. The most devastating and career-defining moment came when Hendrix, apparently recognizing that his earlier comments about primitive island music had been completely refuted and demolished by Bob's performance, attempted to acknowledge his error and publicly apologize during his set. "I want to publicly apologize to Bob Marley and the Caribbean musical tradition," he said into his microphone, his voice clearly audible to the entire con audience and international media present. "I spoke from ignorance, cultural prejudice, and arrogance, and what I just heard proves that I don't understand music as well as I thought I did." The public apology from Jimi Hendrix to Bob Marley became international news and marked a fundamental turning point in how reggae music and Caribbean culture were perceived by the global music industry, educated audiences worldwide, and cultural critics who had previously dismissed non-Western musical traditions. The incident demonstrated conclusively that artistic greatness could not be measured solely by technical complexity or electric amplification, but required spiritual authenticity and cultural depth that connected with universal human experiences and transcendent truths.
For Bob Marley personally, the Cannes Festival incident elevated his status from regional Caribbean performer to internationally recognized artistic genius, whose music deserved to be taken seriously by the most sophisticated audiences and critics throughout Europe and America. Record sales increased dramatically throughout Europe and North America, and Bob began receiving invitations to perform at prestigious venues and festivals that had previously been reserved exclusively for American and British rock acts. For Jimi Hendrix, the incident marked the beginning of a significant decline in his reputation as the definitive voice of contemporary guitar music and rock innovation. Music critics began questioning whether his electric virtuosity represented genuine artistic innovation or merely technical showmanship without spiritual substance or cultural authenticity. And his influence on younger musicians began to diminish as they discovered the deeper musical possibilities represented by Bob's approach to guitar and songwriting. The Cannes confrontation became a watershed moment in the evolution of international popular music, demonstrating that artistic legitimacy could emerge from any cultural tradition, and that Western rock music's claims to superior sophistication were often based on ignorance, cultural prejudice, and lack of understanding rather than genuine musical knowledge or artistic insight. The incident also had profound implications for the music industry's approach to booking international artists and presenting world music to Western audiences. Festival organizers throughout Europe and America began actively seeking out authentic representatives of non-Western musical traditions, while record labels started investing heavily in reggae and other Caribbean musical forms as commercially viable and artistically significant genres worthy of major promotional campaigns. Major music publications, including Rolling Stone, Melody Maker, and New Musical Express, began covering Caribbean music with the same seriousness they devoted to American and British rock acts. Music journalists who had previously ignored or dismissed reggae as a novelty genre began writing in-depth analyses of Bob's songwriting techniques, musical arrangements, and cultural significance. Radio programmers throughout Europe and America started incorporating reggae into their regular playlists, while television producers began booking Caribbean artists for major variety shows and music programs that had previously featured only Western rock and pop acts. The Cannes incident had essentially forced the international music industry to acknowledge Caribbean music as an equal artistic tradition rather than an exotic curiosity. Music schools and conservatories began incorporating reggae and Caribbean music into their curricula, recognizing that these traditions represented sophisticated musical systems worthy of serious academic study and analysis. The incident helped establish the field of ethnomusicology as a legitimate academic discipline and encouraged Western musicians to approach non-Western musical traditions with greater respect and cultural sensitivity rather than dismissive superiority. The confrontation also inspired a generation of musicians from various cultural backgrounds to take pride in their own indigenous traditions rather than attempting to imitate Western popular music styles. Artists from Africa, Latin America, Asia, and other regions began asserting the value of their indigenous musical forms and demanding equal treatment from the international music industry and cultural establishment. The incident became a symbol of the broader cultural transformations taking place during the 1970s, as previously marginalized voices began asserting their artistic legitimacy and challenging Western cultural hegemony. Bob's victory over Hendrix represented more than just a musical triumph. It symbolized the emergence of a new global consciousness that recognized the equal value of all cultural traditions. The performance footage from that evening, preserved in the Cannes Festival archives, continues to be studied by musicologists and cultural theorists as a perfect example of how authentic artistic expression can transcend cultural barriers and challenge entrenched prejudices through the universal language of music and spiritual authenticity. Today, the 1973 Cannes Festival performance is remembered as the moment when Caribbean music gained international respect and recognition as a legitimate art form worthy of serious critical attention and academic study. Bob's response to Hendrix's cultural ignorance remains a powerful model for how artists can defend their traditions through excellence rather than argument, proving that authentic musical greatness transcends all cultural boundaries and commercial categories, while challenging fundamental assumptions about artistic hierarchy and cultural value systems.